Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 SNAP ENT National Forum session on serving and engaging ABAWDS through SNAP ENT. My name is Brian Solomon, and I am a SNAP ENT Senior Analyst with FNS's Western Region. I'm very excited to serve as your moderator for this session. We are very honored to have John Briscoe from the state of Oregon, Karina Adams from the state of Washington, Kelly Tessitore and Philip Schukert from JFS Boston presenting on this very timely subject. A little bit about our speakers. John Briscoe has 28 years with the Oregon Department of Human Services. He started right out of college as a bilingual eligibility worker and case manager, and then spent 18 years as a district program manager, and the last 2+ years as program manager overseeing SNAP ENT and the TANF jobs programs for the state of Oregon. His team has made possible an expansion of services both within SNAP and TANF to provide opportunities of hope and help guide Oregonians out of poverty. Karina Adams has worked for Washington State Department of Social and Health Services for nearly a decade. Her work has spanned many areas from direct service to contracts to program management. Her passions are helping others meet their potential, working on systems improvements, and drag culture. And we have two presenters from Jewish Vocational Services, or JVS, in Boston. Kelly Tessitore is Vice President of Advancement, where she is responsible for the strategic management of JVS's foundation and governmental relationships, as well as policy work on federal workforce development issues. She advances JVS's vision of connecting public assistance recipients to skills and training opportunities through programs such as SNAP ENT. She serves on the National Advisory Panel of Safety Net and Skills Policy for the National Skills Coalition and has more than 20 years of experience with employment training and adult education programs serving diverse populations. Philip Schukert is the Director of Career Path Programs at JVS Boston, where he oversees several teams that provide job readiness training, job search support, education and training services, and post-employment supports for clients receiving SNAP, TANF, and housing assistance. He was the manager of JVS's Career Path Now program, which began serving ABAWDS in 2016 when the waivers for work requirements were removed. He's been involved in workforce development with JVS for almost 6 years after a career in secondary education. And like me, Philip holds a master's degree in public policy, concentrating on poverty and assets from Brandeis University. This is obviously a really important and timely topic, with new final rules about ABAWD implementation and, of course, the pandemic. But even before that, ABAWDS were among the lowest income and hardest to serve populations. Our states and third-party partners have been incredibly innovative in figuring out new ways to reach and engage ABAWDS and help them access services. Thrilled to hear today from two such states in the Pacific Northwest and a vital partner all the way across the country in Boston. So excited to have you all join us for today's session. Please remember that any discussions today do not reflect official USDA policy guidance. As you view the presentations, please ask your questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom taskbar and add your comments in the chat box below. At the conclusion of the presentation, the presenters will have an opportunity to address any questions that you have. Looking very forward to this important session. I want to thank you all so much again for attending, and I'm very pleased to hand this over to John with the state of Oregon to get things started.
Thank you, Brian. Truly appreciate this opportunity to be with all of you, even though it is virtual, and it is a wonderful opportunity for us from the state of Oregon to be able to discuss some of the progress and evolution of our programs as we have based our ABAWD processes in many principles that have driven us to expand our services throughout the state. In order to get an understanding of how we focus on our ABAWDS, I think it's important for us to start where our mission is from our self-sufficiency programs here in the state of Oregon. Our mission here at Self-Sufficiency in Oregon is to provide a safety net, family stability, and connection to careers that guide Oregonians out of poverty. With this base mission, this has allowed us to do some expansion and some thoughtful processes in all of our programs, but especially in our employment and training-based programs. If you understand this mission, obviously the benefits provide that safety net, the SNAP benefits and the other TANF type benefits. But we also believe that in order to help families if they're going to connect to those careers, there needs to be services that help us base family stability. And even with ABAWDS, which are individuals, that is individual stability. And so we have developed systems that will help us do that. Other principles that we base our ABAWD program on is that in our SNAP ENT, we have developed activities for participants in every area of the state. We needed to have a full state strategy. We have a major metropolitan area in the Portland area, but as you move away from there, we go more rural, and even out to the 18 years I spent as a program manager, we're out in Ontario, which is right on the border with Idaho. And parts of were not even only rural, they were census described as frontier. And so the ability to serve and have opportunities all over the state was one of our guiding principles as we developed these programs. The other part of principles that we based our programs on is that we want to help assist individuals to receive and obtain skills, training, work, and experience to increase their ability to get to those living wage employment and to have gainful career pathways. This principle allows us to not just look at a base of, hey, just go get a job. We want you to be able to get that job that is meaningful, career-based. And so that takes us back that you have to provide skills and training. And finally, the last principle we based our development of these programs on is that we had to build a system that would allow for collaboration, a system that included community-based organizations, state partnerships, workforce partnership, and us and the individuals participants. And so in this system, as we talk about how we truly developed our ABAWD focus here in Oregon, these are the principles and the mission that we based on. So Brian, if you can go to the next slide. With that, we in Oregon, over the last several years, have been a pledge state. But even without the formal pledge, we always want to have that mission to serve all of our SNAP participants in these employment and training-based programs. Now with ABAWD, obviously it comes with other guidelines that have to be followed, the 80-hour rules and the time limit rules and those things. And so within that, it requires that we have a much more intensive based tracking of their activities and the things that they're doing. And so we began to think, well, if we have to have this statewide and we have to track this, and our benefit workers are already overworked, our eligibility specialists, how can we do this and still be able to fulfill all of the tracking and all of the things, but also set up a system in which the ABAWDS feel like this is an opportunity and not just another mandated requirement for them to, you know, just get their SNAP benefits. So we went and engaged one of our workforce partners, our Oregon Employment Department. They are our Department of Labor partner here in Oregon. And we sat down with them and discussed, you know, their clients, their customers were also our SNAP benefit recipients. In many cases, well over 50%. And so as we discussed that and talked through, plus they also had an awesome software system in which they could help us track these participants. And so we sat down and did an interagency agreement with them. We used the ABAWD pledge funds that we receive to do this agreement, and we began to build a system based on their tracking system and also based on the needs of of the ABAWDS. And so we sat down and we developed an orientation and assessment and case management system where they can, all ABAWDS are referred to them that are in the non-waived counties or communities. And in that sense, when they get there, they go through that orientation and assessment, and then they sit down and do case management with them, and those plans are developed. Now, the important factor of that is that they do have that tracking ability, and they can also support them with support service payments. But then the plans that are developed are set in both internal based services that Oregon Employment Department gives, and also referrals to our local, what we call STEP partners. That is the basis of our SNAP 50/50. We call it STEP program here in Oregon. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. But one more thing before I move on. The other unique thing about ABAWD is that each year we could be serving different labor market areas based on the waivers that we apply for. And so one of the things that also had to be flexible, not just to be able to serve the whole state, but also the flexibility to be able to, this year we, one year we had 5 ABAWD counties, another year we have 13. This fiscal year we were going to have 26, and then COVID hit, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is a situation that, with Oregon being a statewide, Oregon Employment Department being a statewide entity, it allows us to be able to work with them each year as we prepare and know exactly which counties and areas are under waiver and which ones are non-waived. And therefore there's that flexibility. But even with that, our ability to provide services throughout the whole state is based on this STEP partnership. Go ahead and move the slide for me, Brian. I want to tell a little story before I go into these numbers. In Oregon, here about 6 or 7 years ago, we began to look at the SNAP 50/50 program very seriously. Prior to that, we ran a program called Offset, and basically it was an 8-week program which SNAP participants would meet their required mandatory obligations by going out and doing 8 weeks of work search, two work search connections each week, and if they did that, they were okay for the next year on SNAP. It did a little bit of, people would find some jobs and things like that, but it didn't address that issue of really looking into building skills. And so I want to call out Balit Burke, who was in my position at that time, and she began with a pilot here a number of years ago with 2 providers in the Portland metro area in our STEP provider network, and the match plus what they put in came to about $250,000 that first year. This year, 7 years later, as you can see, we have 30 direct contractors, and under those contractors, we have the full plethora of our community college consortia, 17 community colleges throughout the state. Every single one of them in the state is part of the STEP network. We have WorkSource Incorporated in Portland. They are a contractor, and they have 28 subcontractors under them with our STEP providers. And then all of the WorkSource centers, which are under the guise of Oregon Employment Department, there's 37 of them. So we have throughout the whole state 112 sites where providers can provide services in the STEP provider network. Well, how does that tie in then with the ABAWD? Well, we have the ABAWD referred over to Oregon Employment Department. They do that assessment and case management base and build plans based on the interest of those folks. And then they can look at, if it's needed, they can send them to their local community college. They can send them to the other community-based organizations. They can do internal-based services. But And one other thing that is available in our ABAWD services was workfare-based situation. And we worked in conjunction with our food bank system in the whole state, where they all became workfare sites in those areas where ABAWDS were under the time limit requirement. So to finish my story, as you see, with these number of contractors and providers, this year's approved state plan, we're in the new year, the match and together with what's invested by the organizations will be $56 million. So if, as you can see, we have really built, based on our mission and our principles, a capacity to where we can serve all of our SNAP participants and especially be able to have the opportunity for ABAWDS. Go ahead and move the slide. Now, one other thing that we found as we were doing this is, as I mentioned before, our eligibility workers, as they did intake, were didn't have very much time to really talk about this program. We have, as all of you know, eligibility workers are one after another doing intakes or recertifications and things of that nature. And they get a very short amount of time to really talk about this. So internally at Department of Human Services here in Oregon, we looked at our situation because in our TANF program, we have what we call family coaches. We're basically doing case management, doing case plans, working on those things, and doing the referrals to our TANF jobs and doing planning with folks. So we wanted to develop a model in which we could have our eligibility workers be able to make referrals to a family coach based or case management based within us internally, so they could really sit down and describe the programs, talk through goals, strengths, and challenges that families and individuals, ABAWDS, were seeing, and really be able to have a discussion on an interest-based plan and be able to refer to the employment and training providers. So we did a demonstration project beginning back in May of 2019. In our 16 districts, we have 38 SNAP employment and training navigators positions that we finance mostly through the 100% funding from F&S at this point. It's still in a development of how we're really using them, but really they have been a great success in when we're able to get individuals to them. So how does that relate to the ABAWD population? Obviously, as an eligibility worker sits and talks with an ABAWD individual, it becomes very difficult in a very short amount of time to really describe what opportunities there are. So what our model is that eligibility workers are able to refer these folks to the SNAP ENT navigators, and they have a sit-down discussion with them and are able to provide a better guided plan and referrals and handoffs. Now with the ABAWDS in non-wave counties, they are referred directly to the employment and training, or the Oregon Employment Department for some of that, but many times the navigators are there to help make that flow happen even more effectively. Obviously, they have ability to do support services so that these individuals can get to the initial site and be able to receive the other orientation and assessments that they need from our providers. But not only do these navigators do that, they also follow up with our participants to ensure that their success. And they are also technical assistants to our local STEP providers, our SNAP ENT providers. So this position we really regard highly here in Oregon. It's been a great opportunity. And so that's the basis of a lot of what we do with the ABAWDS. I do want to address just a little bit today what has happened here recently with the pandemic. And so, Brian, if you can move us forward. When the pandemic first started, or really got into the focus, just a little story. I was down in Texas with my daughters. My daughter was getting married, and on March 7th, I married her. I came home, and the next week, I was assigned for a month to our emergency command center, and was taken off of this position for that month because I was very focused there. My team sat down while I was gone, and in response to what was going on and the closing down of the economy and things of that week, they reached out to each and every one of our STEP providers in the STEP provider network and had some real guidance. And I want to call out my team because they are so awesome in these things, in conjunction with help and guidance from Western Region FNS, which Brian is our go-to person there, and I want to call him out and thank him for his assistance and help. But we did a very important thing in this, in that we really reached out and tried to see what the operational capacities were. We provided technical assistance. In conjunction with that, as things progressed, we were able to allow expansion of the support services that are allowed in the SNAP employment and training realm. Now, one of the other things that sort of happened, and Brian, you can go ahead and move the slide along. One of the other things that happened during this time was that our ABAWD situation, obviously the unemployment rate skyrocketed here, and we had a situation of how do we continue those services. Well, as of April 1, based under the CARES Act and things, we went into the full waiver mode of the state, and so the time limit function and any losing of benefits sort of went away on that, but we still had this opportunity at this full STEP service level that we could serve all of our SNAP employment and training participants, including the ABAWDS, even though we may not be tracking necessarily that attendance at the 80-hour level, we were still able to give that. And all of our STEP providers are now currently providing SNAP ENT services, whether they be virtual. Some of them are using social distancing and doing a little bit in person, or a hybrid of those. The Community College Consortium has enhanced their supports offered to the STEP participants and the ABAWD folks that are there. We're considering all the options needed to support the services that we deliver to our participants. And finally, we continue that coordination and collaboration amongst our STEP provider network. We have a monthly statewide STEP technical assistance call. On the local district level, we have asked them to each have STEP steering committees which meet often and are coordinating services and talking with each other and working on things. And Brian, could you go ahead and put us to the last slide? So that brings us to this fiscal year. We, due to the pandemic and things of that nature, we were granted a full statewide waiver for this year for the ABAWDS. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean, as I said before, that we won't continue to do an amount of ABAWD work and working with them and giving them opportunities through our STEP program. Obviously, we still need to determine their ABAWD status, the exemptions, look and explain the work requirements, and review those reporting requirements. But most importantly is that last one, making referrals to the ENT Navigator and the STEP program as we identify with them how they want to proceed. This is going to be an interesting year. I imagine that next year will bring us back to where we will have a number of ABAWD areas that will be under our guidance, but this is how we have developed our program, with the thought process of having a statewide ability to serve anyone that is wanting to receive these opportunities, because that is what we want to give, is an opportunity to build those skills, build stability, and connect to a career that helps them move out of poverty. Thank you for your time today. It's been great to be here, and back to you, Brian.
Thank you so much, John. That was wonderful. You know, it's been such a pleasure to work with Oregon on their ABAWD program over my years in this position, and really appreciate you giving us that overview of kind of how you've taken this on and the challenges and some of your amazing successes in the state. So thank you so much. I want to keep going right here, so I want to turn it over to Corinna Adams with the state of Washington to tell us about what they've done. And Corinna and Washington has met with Oregon several times about the Navigator programs. You're going to hear a little bit more about that, and we're looking forward to it. So thanks so much for joining us. Corinna, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. It's an honor to be here. Now, many of you know a lot about our Basic Food Employment and Training Program, or our BFET program, which is the 50/50 Employment and Training Program. But I am going to talk a little bit more about what we specifically do with ABAWDS. And kind of piggybacking on John's presentation, I'm going to go into a little bit more details about exactly how we built our ABAWD Navigator program. So the objectives today are to talk about the rule changes and how that was going to impact Washington, and drove us into planning and work groups in order to develop our own ABAWD Navigator model and referral program. Next slide.
I'm working on it. Hold on.
Sorry.
Okay. There we go.
All right, so this just gives you an idea of how much Washington State was impacted by the new rule change. And so when I say new rules, I mean the December 5th, 2019 rule changes. And the current rules are the ones that we have right now under the injunction. And of course, the train's going by right now. And so you can see that prior to, or with the new rules, Washington State was going to have this huge impact to our SNAP clients. Next slide.
Obviously having some problems with the slides here, so bear with me. I'm punching it. There we go.
Okay. Oops. All right. So just about 68,000 of our SNAP clients would have been impacted. And I don't mean that 68,000 clients would have lost their benefits, but what I do mean is that Washington State would have the responsibility to notify these clients of additional work requirements and make sure that they're connected to employment and training services or reassessed for an exemption. And as you can see here, this was our 101 for coming up to that change right before COVID. Next slide.
Be patient, I'm working on it. I think there's something a little wrong because I'm whacking away here. So my apologies.
Well, I can continue. So the next slide is going to show our 36-month time clock. Here in Washington, we have a set time clock of for all of our ABAWDS. So it is January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2020. So you can see the new waiver was going to hit, right on April 1st. And that would mean that, we'd have to get information out to potential mandatory ABAWDS to let them know about their new requirements. And if they did not participate, then in May, we would have started sending out termination notices for June 30th. So you can see that this is a huge impact, and we really wanted to make sure that we were ready for this change. Next slide. Great. Washington State is also, or has also been a pledge state just like Oregon. So it was really important to us to continue that. And under the CARES Act, many states are choosing to not refer clients out to ENT providers, therefore not having any at-risk ABAWDS. But here in Washington, we want to make sure that we're still engaging all of our underemployed or unemployed clients who are able-bodied adults. So go ahead with the next slide. Thank you. We have a commitment to transform lives. That's our mission and values. And we have a strategic planning priority to provide a pathway out of poverty and to become healthier. So it is really important to us that we give all ABAWDS, not just at-risk ABAWDS, the chance to engage in individualized ENT services. We believe connecting able-bodied adults to these services statewide will give them the opportunity to rejoin the economy either in a different field or with greater with greater skills as our state continues to reopen. So we actually are moving forward as an at-risk state with one county in 2021 so that we can seek out these pledge funds to help all of our ABAWDS statewide. Next slide. So what to do? You heard Oregon's plan, and Washington heard about it, and we just had to go down and see. So thank you, Oregon, for hosting us and telling us all about your program so that we could look at how to mirror it up in Washington. So the first thing we did was identify our objectives. We wanted, just like Oregon, we wanted to ensure that ABAWDS statewide would have access to these ENT services. We do have BFET services and WIOA services statewide, but it's the idea that we wanted to really make sure we connected ABAWDS with a warm handoff. We were acknowledging our challenges. We already had an open-ended referral program or process, but that would entail some of our eligibility staff talking to clients, letting them know about the programs, maybe giving them a pamphlet or some information, and then that was it. It wasn't like there was a connection to see if the ABAWD had actually gone to that ENT service until we were looking at participation. Or if they were not in a mandatory county, then we weren't looking at all. So it was really important to us as we created the Navigator program that there would be a warm handoff where the client really felt comfortable going to that ENT provider, and also some follow-up to find out if it was a successful connection before we looked at participation. And again, Washington also has rural areas, and so that was important to us to make sure that there really was a human body there to help those clients. Data sharing is also a part that we wanted to make sure we were being very clear and intentional about, when you are giving out client data for referral purposes. And then finally, training and awareness. Because King County has been unwaived for multiple years, in King County, a lot of the providers, a lot of the clients, a lot of the other community-based organizations and nonprofits know about the ABAWD policy, but that's not the case in the rest of Washington. So we knew that training and awareness was going to be a big piece as we started to have other non-waived areas. We also wanted to talk about who can do that work. You heard Oregon talk about their employment system taking on the task. We did look at working with our employment security department. Unfortunately, with COVID, it was not great timing, but we are going to look at working with them in the future. They are a BFET provider. But we actually ended up going with our our State Board of Community and Technical Colleges. They are also a BFET provider. They're very familiar with employment and training, workforce development boards, and managing federal grants. There's a lot of work that goes into having a federal grant, and so they're very familiar with it, and they were a natural partner for this. We did also look at our funding, the federal funding, ABAWD pledge funds, our own state employment and training funds. And then I just wanted to mention, in case any other states might have something interesting like this, whenever you're grading funds, you have to be careful where you're using them. In Washington State, we not only have the federal SNAP food program, but we actually have a state-funded food program. So it was really important to us that we actually put some state funding towards the ABAWD Navigator program so that our state-funded food clients could also use the services. Next slide. All right. Well, once we decided to partner with the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, next was figuring out responsibilities. Who was going to be responsible for what? And we did that through a contract, an interlocal contract. And this is kind of just the breakdown of who was going to do what. The state is responsible for training our own eligibility staff and creating the system in which the referral would take place to State Board. We're responsible for reporting to the to FNS, to the federal government, and compliance for contract management and funding. State Board is responsible for hiring navigators, training them, creating their own systems to talk with the referral process, as well as reporting. State Board is the state entity, and so they are also responsible to make sure the performance of each individual college navigator is up to par, their own contract management and billing. So it was really a fantastic interaction to build this contract with them. And one other thing is that we were really intentional about addressing systems change that we knew we wanted to happen. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Next slide. All right, this is my favorite graphic in my presentation. To you, you may see a bunch of colored dots with random titles in them. But to me, each of these bubbles represents an individual person who worked so hard between May 2019 and March 2020 to get this program off the ground. I'm going to talk about a few of them a little bit. So the first one is DSHS and State Board leadership. From day one, they had our back. And that was really important for supporting the project. It really is a key factor to success when it comes to time allocation and resource allocation. So I'm very proud and happy that our leadership was on board. Number two is having a project manager. We had a DSHS project manager who was responsible not only for the Navigator project, but also our whole entire division's response to the rule change. But she was amazing. She made sure that all of the subcommittees stayed on track. She tracked details and challenges. She made sure communication was broad and open with all of the players. So that was really fantastic. I highly recommend having a project manager. Third is field staff. Change Management 101 tells us that we need to involve those who will be impacted by a change in the development of the change. So it was very important to our group that we had eligibility staff on board and also ABAWD navigators as they were hired. One example is that our eligibility staff actually drafted the all-staff memo that went out to their peers about the change. So they really had that perspective of what would be important to each worker. And the ABAWD navigators helped endlessly with ideas about how they could market or who they could talk to in their communities and what kind of tracking documents they would want to use to track the ABAWDS and what have you. It was really great. And I'll finish up by talking about this little cluster that's kind of off to the side that doesn't look like it's part of the main group. These are individuals that, while they don't have to be involved in the day-to-day processes, they are super important to the overall success. Our IT staff were key to ensuring that the third-party system that we ended up using for referral would talk to our systems and talk to the State Board systems. So can't thank them enough. It was also really important to have all of our community-based organizations involved with the Navigator project. We had multiple community groups that we went out to, and I would be out there, and so would the ABAWD navigators. They'd introduce themselves, they'd talk about what they were going to be doing with our ABAWD clients. They would ask any nonprofit or resource or any group that they were speaking to, you know, to get in touch with them and talk to them about the services that our clients might be eligible for out in the community. So it was really fantastic. And so I'm really thankful to that group as well. Next slide. So we went ahead and launched our ABAWD Navigator program in March 2020. In fact, the same weekend that COVID hit Washington State and our governor made a proclamation that we were shut down. Again, our ABAWD Navigators were amazing. On a dime, they switched to doing virtual services. They have come up with all sorts of interesting ways to contact our clients, even using like Google text services and those kinds of things, just like Oregon was talking about. Our BFET providers are also providing virtual services. So it's really amazing. Now, what I will say is when we first launched in March, we had a manual referral process. We had a pretty clunky tool that our eligibility staff had to use, and it would create a report on the back end, and then myself and my coworker would have to manually pull that report and send it off to State Board, and it was very clunky, but it worked. It was just a little delayed. The ABAWD Navigators were kind of contacting the clients like a week to 2 weeks after they had talked to an eligibility staff. Not ideal. So in August, we were actually able to implement the Trumba calendar service. It's an automatic scheduling tool. So our eligibility staff can actually, while they're on a phone with an ABAWD client and talking about, you know, them being an ABAWD or what that means, can actually go to an individual navigator's schedule, pick out an appointment time, put in the client's contact information, and it real time delivers that referral to the ABAWD Navigator. And there's also an opportunity to plug in an email address if the client wants to have a reminder before their appointment time. And we think that's going to help tremendously. As I said, that just launched in August, so we're still looking and seeing, analyzing how it's helped and what have you. But overall, I think it's been really smooth and great for our clients and providers. Next slide. And this is just kind of an overall view of our ABAWD navigation model. Oregon talked about like specific steps that their navigators take with the client, you know, and doing an assessment and what have you. Ours is mirrored exactly, so I won't duplicate that. But so their first and foremost duty is to give ABAWD support. Secondly, is to have that community collaboration where they're really reaching out to their local resources so they know about them all the time. You know, they can keep up to date on those local resources. Last is resource expansion, and I want to just take a second to talk about that. That has to do with being plugged into the community, not just nonprofit organizations and low-income services, but the business world and workforce development, and what businesses are emerging that maybe the community and technical colleges would like to make new curriculum for. So that it's all about using this position to even be plugged into what we can do in the future, what jobs we can get future clients into. So that's really amazing, and we're excited to see where we can go with that. And so then next slide. Lastly, this is just what I want to leave you with, is that communication is the key to success. I am so proud that all of these different pieces were brought together, and there's just so much good open communication, so many meetings in person. Before COVID, I really wish we could have more in-person meetings, but over Zoom or WebEx or phone calls is great too, because these are all individuals who are passionate about our communities, passionate about our clients, passionate about career success and meeting potential. So it's really great when you get all of these people in the same room, just like we are today, because we all care about the same thing. So thank you so much.
Karina, thank you so much. Just such an honor to work with Washington State and Oregon State on their programs. They really are just not only on ABAWDS, but really on ENT in general among our national leaders. And we're so appreciative to the work that you guys do. I also want to thank everybody for their patience. I'm really sorry about the technical issues that we're having. Seem to be coming along at the end there, so hopefully we'll be smooth for this next presentation as well. And then just a reminder to the audience to please put your questions at the bottom for our speakers that we'll get to after our presentation. So thank you so much again, John and Karina. I'm very happy to move this over to JVS Boston. We work really closely with JVS here in California. And I know Massachusetts has as well, and JVS has really been not just a national leader on ENT and this kind of work, but also a regional leader in the areas where they're located. So Kelly and Philip, thank you so much for being here. Very happy to turn it over to you. Take it away and tell us about how you've been working with ABAWDS in your program.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I'm going to start out. So good afternoon or morning if you're on the West Coast. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Philip and I will be sharing with you our experience developing a successful model for engaging and serving ABAWDS. Can you go to the next slide, please? So you heard from two state organizations. JVS is not a state agency. We're a nonprofit workforce development organization. Tell you just a little bit about how we're different. So JVS has a dual mission, which is empowering individuals from diverse communities to find employment and build careers, but also partnering with employers to hire, develop, and retain productive workforces. So we're really operating in that space in between job seekers and employers. Last year, we connected about 2,300 people with jobs and partnered with almost 1,700 employers to do that. We offer a really wide range of services, skills training in 8 sectors. Last year, we graduated 380 people from those programs, a full continuum of adult education from ESOL and high school diploma through college prep. And we also operate an American Job Center, which in Massachusetts, they've all been rebranded as Mass Hire. And in addition, some targeted programming for special populations like refugees and immigrants or individuals with disabilities. Next slide. So in terms of our history with SNAP employment and training, in 2007, JVS was one of 5 pilot sites that launched in Massachusetts to figure out what this SNAP employment and training thing was all about. And we worked on that for many years. And then in 2015, with a new administration at our state authority, we worked really closely with our DTA and with other stakeholders to really figure out how to improve SNAP employment and training utilization in Massachusetts. And ultimately, the state launched a new statewide system, which they called the SNAP Path to Work. And then right after that, when Greater Boston lost its ABAWD waiver at the end of 2015, so that people would have been losing SNAP benefits in April of 2016, we worked with DTA to design and implement a program specifically for ABAWDS. Even though there were some services existing in Massachusetts, they didn't necessarily offer 80 hours of engagement or meet the other rules that would satisfy ABAWD work requirements. And the bulk of ABAWDS that were identified were really in the Greater Boston area. So we decided to develop and pilot a program from JVS in Boston that could serve the majority of the new ABAWDS that we were seeing. And it was really a new thing at that time, without much to build on besides just the regulations. So the program that we developed has been really successful. And last year in 2019, we worked with DTA to expand our model statewide through the Mass Hire system and become an ABAWD pledge state for the first time. The program that we developed for ABAWDS is called Career Path Now. We wanted to create a program that would not just meet participants' work requirement, but also meaningfully move them toward economic opportunity. And we didn't want to limit people to a one-size-fits-all approach, but instead to make available the full workforce development system to them. So the model we created is essentially career coaching around a person-centered plan. It can include a bridge job or a job for now, education or training, and a goal job on a career pathway at a higher wage. And we can really work with people over time to have a plan with multiple goals and steps and really help to move them farther. We call our coaches career navigators, much like you heard from Washington and Oregon. And they work with our participants to set goals, to identify resources, to navigate really the full array of education and training available in the region. Our clients in Career Path Now can also participate in another JVS program, like earning their high school diploma or training in any of those sectors we looked at before, or they can participate in education or training at another provider as well, while they continue to work with their career navigator at JVS. Can you go to the next slide, please? So these are some demographics on our enrollments over the past 4.5 years. Interestingly, 56% of the people that we serve are female. And so even though that's a majority female, the population that we're serving in Career Path Now is actually much more likely to be male, has a lot more men in it than other safety net programs, like a program aimed at TANF recipients. So that's been kind of a difference for us as we developed and implemented the program, is just seeing a lot more men than we had seen in other similar programs. Among the people that we were serving, 78% were born in the US, so 22% were immigrants. In terms of race, more than half are Black or African American, more than a quarter are white, and the rest are smaller numbers of other races. I think if you look at the education level, it's interesting that almost half have just a high school diploma or less of the ABAWD population that we see, while about 30% have some sort of post-secondary education, like a vocational credential or some college, and 25% have an earned degree, either associate, bachelor, or I think there's even 6 or 7% that have a master's or a doctorate degree. But I think one of the most striking things about ABAWDS and the people that we see is that 83% of them are employed when we meet them. So we have a large population of people who are working, but are still are not earning enough to be off of SNAP. Even as single individuals, you're not talking about big family sizes because we're talking about ABAWDS here. And that's a really important characteristic of the population. So in our program, we work with people over time. We help them find immediate employment, which we call a bridge job. We can help them pursue education or training as fits their personal goals. And ultimately, we can help them find a better job, or a goal job, we call those. Since we started the program, I guess this is 4 years of data because we just cut off data tracking right when the pandemic hit. We helped 232 people find employment at an average wage of $14.26 per hour, an average of 31 hours per week. And of those jobs, 101 have been what we call sustainable jobs, which we've defined as full-time and paying at least the living wage, which is set by the city of Boston each year. We're really trying to think in our program about not just connecting people to a first job or to an immediate job, but helping them over time to really make progress in economic mobility. Next slide, please. So who are ABAWDS? When we created this program, we had the objective of finding and engaging all the ABAWDS in Greater Boston affected by the loss waiver. We learned a lot about who ABAWDS are during this time. And I'm not talking about the official definition of what's an ABAWD. I'm talking about like the people that we actually turned up, that we actually met through the services, which wasn't necessarily what we thought when we started out. So one of the first things that we noticed is that the ABAWD definition, it's not really an affirmative definition. So you arrive at who is an ABAWD by ruling out people based on characteristics. So they're not under 18, they're not over 49, they're not medically exempt, they're not living with a child under 18, they're not working 80 hours a month, and so on and so on. It's really just who's left after you pull a bunch of people out of a pool. It doesn't tell you much about who they are, more who they aren't. Another thing that we have learned over time is that many of the people that show up to us as ABAWDS, when you talk to them, it turns out they're not really ABAWDS. Most commonly, we learn that someone has a medical issue, or they actually do live in a household with a child under 18 who just isn't in their assistance case, you know, et cetera. So lots and lots of reasons that people actually turn out not to be ABAWDS. Maybe the way that our system works and the way they're looking for data is, you know, all the not this, not that, but that's what we find out. And then I think one of the really important things to worry about, to remember about ABAWDS is that it's not really a permanent status, because it's not actually a characteristic, it's an absence of other characteristics. And a lot of people that we meet, they could be an ABAWD when we meet them, but they don't stay an ABAWD, or they're not an ABAWD today, but they will be in the near future. For example, someone who's recently had surgery and they can't work, but they can and will work later, or maybe they could work now, but they have surgery coming up and they know that and they won't be able to work for a period of time after that. They can get a temporary medical exemption, and then we really approach that as working with them to get them back to work at the right time. We see seasonal workers whose income fluctuates. Maybe they're unemployed now and they're receiving SNAP, but they have worked earlier in the year and they're probably going to go back to that same job as soon as the season starts again. So, you know, a lot of people don't stay ABAWDS. We really like to talk to people about thinking about their 3 months that they can not be meeting the work requirement as months in the bank. So stopping that clock whenever there's a reason as soon as possible so that we can have that happen for people. Okay, and then most of the people that we meet, as I mentioned, do have work experience. Most ABAWDS have worked before and will work again and are using SNAP as a safety net. So we want to help people plan for their future, including what to do when things fall apart. We want to help people manage their 3 strike months. Most of the people that we meet that are using the safety net, they're people who have experiences where things just fall apart in their lives and they need some help to get back on track, and they're using SNAP that way. And we want to figure out not just to have a transactional relationship with them, but to really help them over time. Can you go to the next slide, please? So over the past 4.5 years, we've tried so many different strategies and have so much experience about reaching out to and serving ABAWDS, and like to share with you a little bit about what hasn't worked and what has. We made a website, careerpathnow.org. We run Facebook ads, which are effective for other of our programs, but not for this service. We've advertised on subways and buses. We've worked on referral partnerships with CBOs, but ultimately it's really complicated for people to understand who is and isn't an ABAWD. We've mailed letters and brochures to people's homes. None of these methods have been effective, and we hope we can save all of you some time and money and encourage you just to skip that entire list there on the left. On the other hand, we found a few things that work really well, which my colleague Philip is going to talk to you about. Our most effective technique has been simply to call ABAWDS using the phone numbers we get from DTA. Another winner for us has been figuring out exactly where ABAWDS live and offering services in their neighborhoods. And of course, word of mouth referrals from current and former clients has been really important. And now Philip is going to walk you through the details of what we've done that's been successful. Next slide.
Thank you, Kelly. And picking up where Kelly left off, the strong partnership that we maintain with our state agency has allowed us to get a monthly list of all work required SNAP recipients in our area. This has proved to be the most reliable method of engaging clients, but it requires consistent effort. On this slide, you see data that reflects our efforts to call potential clients during a sample month. On the face of it, it might seem easy with a list of 1,800 potential clients. Our first step each month is to clean this list. We remove the names of clients that don't have phone numbers, that speak a language other than English or Spanish, or who have told us on a previous call that they don't want to be contacted. That brings us down to a little over 1,000 potential clients. Of that, we speak to only about 1/3. 2/3 don't answer. Maybe we leave a voicemail. Often there's no voicemail set up. Sometimes it's simply a wrong number that's in the system. So now we're talking about speaking to roughly 350 people. In this month, we scheduled 54 of them for appointments. That's a 5% success rate of that original 1,060 calls that we started with. Some of them will ask us to call back, so maybe we'll get them in the future. But you can see it's a labor to work through and make that contact and to bring them in. And typically we speak to many clients multiple times before we schedule an appointment. Next slide, please. Simply because we schedule an appointment, that's only the first step. And we quickly learned that saying yes on the phone was not going to bring clients into our offices. Clients face transportation challenges in the form of a lack of resources for fares or bus routes that take multiple routes and transfers, meaning it could take them an hour and a half to get downtown. We also discovered that many of our clients rarely ventured from their neighborhoods and found the journey downtown to be rather daunting. To address this barrier, we developed a system of satellite offices in our highest need neighborhoods. Using the data that we got from our state authority and a piece of software called Tableau, we generated heat maps like you see on this slide that showed us where our clients actually lived. We established partnerships with CBOs and were able to place 4 navigators within a half a mile of our densest clusters. The result of this was that we dropped our no-show rate by over 5%, and we increased engagement from clients in these high-need areas by over 6%. We also saw greater engagement and retention among our existing clients. It really, for us, underscored the value of the personal relationship that we're trying to build and communicate to our ABAWDS that we really take them seriously and we're really concerned about bringing this service to them. Next slide, please. So the relationship building process that I think is at the core of our model starts with that outreach call and continues through this enrollment process. A client saying yes to an appointment is not a yes to actually working with us. To bring the client along, we developed this 3-meeting process to establish a comfortable working relationship between the client and their navigator. Initially, we assumed that the pressure of the work requirement would move people through these activities in roughly a week. What we learned with experience was that this process needs to be client-driven, and in many cases, it's going to play out over several weeks until the client is ready to say, yes, I want to work with you. We don't consider the client enrolled until they move through this entire process. You can see in the orange bubble or the yellow bubbles, navigator activity. It starts with navigators making an initial phone call. That's an appointment reminder and an introduction, hopefully to help set the client at ease. During these meetings, the navigators are following up frequently, scheduling clients or rescheduling them. They're often sending resources in the form of training opportunities or job leads to help the client begin to envision something more. The real goal of this process is to get the client to an individualized goal plan. Once the client has established what it is they want to do, we believe they're ready for an enrollment. And assuming they've been approved by our state authority, we now are ready to move ahead in our work with the clients. Next slide. We would define Career Path Now as a goal-based program. It's built around the client's short-term and long-term goals, as well as their immediate action steps. Clients can proceed along either an employment track or an education and training track, or both, either simultaneously or in sequence. A client can continue in the program until he or she reaches an income level where they are no longer SNAP eligible, or until they feel like they've met their current goals. On average, clients are engaged 7 to 8 months with our program, but it could be longer depending upon the types of goals that they establish and the significance of the barriers they need to overcome. An individual path might take them through an initial part-time bridge job on the way to a gold job. It may take them through education and training as well to reach that gold job. One of the things that we've come to learn is that despite those nice straight arrows, a client's journey is rarely such a straight line. They're often broken up by periods of disengagement. Rather than seeing that as a failure, we've come to see that as a normal part of a typical client trajectory. Crises arise and clients often struggle to continue to work on their goals when they're managing those events. Most do circle back to us weeks or even months later. The slide we've moved to illustrates just a couple of quick case studies, Leon and George. Both of them faced challenges, and without the support of their navigator, it's likely that they would have fallen off the path that they were on. In Leon's case, as he worked on a CDL training program, they discovered his driver's license was expired, and he had about $1,000 in excise taxes and unpaid parking bills. He had to take one of those bridge jobs to earn the money to allow him to get his license reinstated and to complete his training program. He has done that, and he's moved to a job in the industry at $48 an hour. George came in unemployed and was quickly hired in a temporary position, which he lost after the first week because he really lacked a lot of basic life skills like time management, adhering to a sleep schedule. Following the loss of that job, he worked with his navigator to address those issues, to put plans in place, and move on to a new job. His navigator followed up to hold him to task for that plan, and he retained that job over a 2-year period, during which time he was able to enroll in college and then move on to a gold job. You can see there in May of 2019, he moves to a $20.53 an hour job with one of the new casinos in the Boston area, a job that also included tuition remission that helped him with his college degree pursuit. Both of these stories illustrate clients who could easily have been derailed and dispirited by their setbacks. The strong relationships that they had with their career navigators helped them to persevere to new careers and new lives. We believe that the strong relationships fostered by the one-on-one coaching model and a goal-driven program are the keys to serving this population. Thanks, and Brian, I think I'm turning it back to you.
Great, thank you all so very much. Those were wonderful. Really appreciate all the information sharing. I want to say a couple things before we begin our Q&A. First of all, just again, thank you all so much for presenting and helping us address this very, as I said at the beginning, timely and important topic. At this time, we're going to pose questions for attendees from what we've been collecting throughout the presentation. And please do note that you can still submit questions using the Q&A feature even as we're going through this. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much again, everyone.